Hi, welcome to another tutorial. This one is building on the previous two, and this time we're going to be looking on how to align people with your value proposition. So think of the scenario where you have many stakeholders, all of whom have the different ideas on what they think should be done. So say, for example, you're a product manager and you're wanting to get consensus on the roadmap or prioritize the features in your backlog. Or say, for example, you're a business partner who've got many different functions to look after, and they all have different ideas on what kind of technical solutions they're wanting, or there's many issues that you have that need to be resolved, and all are competing for your time. So different agendas, and in fact there's very little alignment or consensus between all of these different stakeholders. So I used this reason in the previous tutorial to explain why that you have this, and the idea still persists even if you have many different stakeholders. So the lack of an agreed value proposition means that it allows confusion to creep in, and even if people have different perspectives, if you have different perspective about different things, then it compounds the issue. So getting alignment and getting consensus means talking about the same thing but also aligning that perspective, and today I'm going to be showing you how you can do that in more detail. So we're going to take another perspective on defining value. We're going to be establishing something what I call chain links between activities and outcomes, and looking at how that can be used to corral people onto the same topic of conversation, so to speak. And then I'm going to be providing you with a template to provide the big picture for all of these different contributors, all of these different stakeholders who have different opinions, and see where their perspective sits, and so that you can help identify scope and look at the direction, the overall objective everybody at least should be working towards, so that you can make progress, you can enhance your career, gain credibility in your organization. So let's look at the first aspect, which is defining value. Now, value, when you say it by yourself, is abstract, it lacks context. And if I were to ask you the question, what do you do? And you say, oh, I'm adding value, and I'll be left with the immediate question in my mind, well, value in what sense, right? So you need a value proposition to help articulate what we mean, to provide that context. And in the previous tutorial, I said there's 5 elements: what, who, benefit, how, and KPI. And in fact, without those, one of those elements, you don't have sufficient information to convey that message. So why do I focus on these specific points again? Well, we're going to be looking at a deeper perspective this time, in more detail. And when people have different perspectives of what we're talking about, they're talking from their frame of reference. So I like to think of value as being a benefit in the eye of the beholder. So this is obviously taken from that well-worn phrase, beauty is in the eye of the beholder, and it's true. It is unique and specific to that individual, what's important to them. So a benefit by itself is fine. We talk about it in vague terms like return on investment or some kind of financial benefit, but really when we're getting to the heart of the matter, when we've got so many different perspectives, we need to tune those benefits to those specific stakeholders, what's in it for them. And if they see a benefit for themselves, then you're much more likely to start getting traction and have the building blocks in place for getting consensus. Now, this means you've got to target their emotional hook, what drives them, what's important to them, what gets them out of bed in the morning and what keeps them awake at night. It's understanding their political motives and what makes them tick. Now, this isn't immediately obvious. You need to build relationships and help them open up so they can reveal some of their thinking, which may not necessarily be immediately obvious. And once you've got that, you can fine-tune the value proposition so it really targets what they're wanting to get. Now, an additional deep dive, so to speak, is where we're going to focus on the how. So I believe how is made up of two components. One is an outcome and an activity, and both together make an intrinsic part of this fundamental capstone, so to speak, out of all of the different building blocks. Now, we focus on outcomes simply because they can be recognized by all stakeholders as being something tangible and relevant for everybody. So whilst the benefit may be specific and unique, an outcome is actually something which can be defined and measurable. So, for example, if we have an objective, then that is achieving the outcome. And if we have a key performance indicator, that actually measures the outcome. So getting the outcomes defined are really extremely important to maintain the integrity, so to speak, of a value proposition. So let's move on to the second bit now, which is talking about chain links. Now, as I've alluded to before, a value proposition needs the benefits, the how, the what, and the who, and so on and so forth. So we've got the benefits, outcomes and activities are the how. Now, what we need to demonstrate is that if an action takes place that delivers the outcome, which everybody recognizes and agrees upon, which then delivers the benefit that all the individual stakeholders at least perceive as having something in it for them. Now, the important point is that link has got to be there. Why is that important? Well, if we don't have that link of causality, so to speak, then you may be able to argue that the activities that we're doing don't actually contribute to the outcome at the end of the day. So what's the point? Why bother doing an activity if it's not delivering the outcome which we've all agreed is important and we should be striving for? So we need to demonstrate some kind of causality. So nothing worse than delivering a system when it's not used properly, or a feature. You get the idea. The only real way we can do this in a specific context is to prove through conducting experiments, creating prototypes, to provide that evidence or case study so that people can recognize that, saying, yes, this activity will produce the outcome. So you don't have to go all the way to implement absolutely everything. It's just sufficient information to prove the point. Now, if you've already got a strong established reputation in the business, and it's not necessary to put a full weighty business case together to get something over the line, that's great. But in many cases, people sometimes overlook this and don't put in sufficient information to a business case and then get caught out later. So with doing sufficient due diligence, we can avoid some of these dud projects where it becomes obvious that the outcome is never going to be achieved because we've poorly defined the activities and indeed the outcomes, and the value proposition was never going to give any value. So establishing those chain links are very important to give credibility to the business case and to make sure that we don't end up doing dud projects or delivering features which are not going to be used. Now, those chain links don't necessarily happen at one level. They can cascade throughout the organisation. And this is where we start to see that the overall big picture coming into play. So ideally, a business is there to serve its customers. It has a mission. It focuses on a specific market. It delivers certain kinds of products, and these should be well defined with a purpose that motivates people to work towards those goals. Now, Those goals can then be cascaded down to the individual tiers of the organisation, down to the individual. So you yourself can understand what your contribution is to the actual customers' products and services at the end of the day. And quite often I've been working in situations or with clients, or I've heard stories where that alignment doesn't exist. It's not clear what they're supposed to be doing, or the goals are so abstract that they're not necessarily very relevant to the work you're doing on a day-to-day basis. So cascading these outcomes and activities down the different tiers will help you get that sense of alignment right from the individuals all the way through to the customer. So what could be more important as a product manager or a business partner who've got a team of people working for them to motivate them and help them understand how their work and activity actually contributes to the end outcome at the end of the day. They can start to see their position in the contribution they're making, and so can other teams. So when it comes to saying, well, what was their value, that team, what did they deliver, we can start pointing to something like this and saying, well, this is their contribution, this is how they fit in, thus kind of bringing a neat answer to that kind of question. So you're asking me, well, John, how do you actually demonstrate this in practice? Well, here is a blank template, and what you'll see here at the top here is the basic framework of a value proposition, and I've kind of broken it out into the basic tiers. So the idea is you fill in a unique value proposition for each level, and then you can articulate, explain in conversation with people as how that value proposition at one level then links to the value proposition at a level higher up. Okay, so let's do an example now. So here we are in a situation where there's plenty of opportunity for misinterpretation or misalignment. And this is a subject close to my heart, and also the people who I speak to on a regular basis. I've been speaking to quite a few product managers recently, and they too have very similar challenges to what I've experienced in the past, and that is getting enough time to think about the future and to try and get alignment in that space, rather than having to deal with a lot of the operational issues and putting out the fires that inevitably take up predominantly most of our time. So what is where do we need to be in order to add more value to the organization? And the idea is, well, if we were to spend more time, then we could fulfill our roles and deliver more value to the customer. So what does that mean in practice? Well, help partners, myself or product managers or other people charged with trying to come up with a roadmap, find the time to plan for the future, such as, say, conducting feasibility studies. It doesn't have to be feasibility studies, but it's just an example as the kind of work you'll be doing. And on the side here, I put in key performance indicators. Well, how do we know we have been successful? Well, often we can say, well, I don't have any time spare. Okay, let's start to measure it. Time spent in a specific domain or activity. So if I was to spend 95% of my time being operational and only 5% that's strategic, perhaps we'd want to rebalance that. So maybe 50-50. Right, let's start measuring it, Opportunities T-shirted is an idea, a small idea, a medium-sized idea, or one that's going to require a massive implementation. You get the idea. So if we've been able to categorize all of those ideas, we can then start to kind of manage the pipeline of work coming through. So as a specific example here. And you can also start to get an understanding of what kind of company this is. Help customers enjoy our park rides more. And then, well, how do you measure that? And I've been a little bit facetious here, well, actually, maybe not. Maybe we do measure smiles and laughs on children's faces when they go to an amusement park, right? Perhaps it's the amount of queue time, which is obviously a much easier thing to measure, or perhaps it's excited kid noises going to the other more esoteric end of the measurement spectrum. So you get an idea of what the company is doing what we're trying to achieve at this level, and is there a relationship between these two? So what is the causality between that, and can we prove to our stakeholders what is necessary and why we should be doing this? All right, so let's say to our immediate stakeholders, well, for this strategic activity to deliver something useful, what you want, and what you've been telling us, is you want to have a plan, a roadmap, to help you think clearly and set the direction in terms of your budgeting and where you need to make changes in the way you work, and how is technology going to help there. Fine. So obviously I'm taking an enterprise IT aspect. This could be relayed to a product management situation in terms of an obvious feature roadmap or an epic roadmap, and building out the backlog and trying to sort of get consensus of what that is. So now let's say we've got two different stakeholders, right? Both who are wanting similar things but going down different paths. So on the one hand, let's say, well, there's a HR function who may want different systems, payroll, timekeeping, government regulation management, or whatever. And then the CIO, he's probably got a different agenda, which is all about making a return on his investment and demonstrating cost effectiveness. And, you know, how do you reduce the number of systems while still, on the one hand, HR departments saying they need new systems, and what's the balance there, and can we get consensus? And here's the thing, right? So in developing a roadmap, you can actually start to articulate that conversation and demonstrate where there is the opportunities, there is conflict or duplication of effort, or where there's the opportunity to reduce resource and prioritize. So if you don't have that time, then obviously you're not going to have that clarity. You're not going to be having that conversation. You're not going to be able to bring, say, the HR director with the CIO and sit down and saying, look, there's an obvious mismatch here in terms of priorities. Let's build something out. Here's the two different roadmaps. Can we get some kind of alignment? Now, that's an example and of a conversation, but also a net outcome as a result of trying to get that clarity. And indeed, if, say, for example, the leadership will want to go to the executive board and saying, look, we've got a team of people here who are spending far too much time in the operational weeds. They need to be raising their game, getting their heads above the parapet to look out and define what the technology roadmap is going to be for our company, because we know it's going to be helping the executive board achieve its mission, which may well be to provide entertainment. There we go, the world's leading producers and providers of entertainment and information through developing the most creative, innovative and profitable entertainment experiences. The leadership will be saying, look, you're not going to be able to achieve that unless we have these people focusing, spending more time in the strategic space. So we need your support to do that. And they'll say, okay, well, we don't believe you. Okay, fine. Let's allocate one person then just to spend full time working on producing a roadmap and seeing if we can deliver a result which actually gives the clarity, and then play that out to, well, does that help with repeat purchases or net promoter score? So if you're actually able to deliver the technology roadmap, could you then demonstrate that as an increase in repeat purchases? You get the idea. So it then cascades up. So there's a somewhat basic example, but you get the idea of where people can start to see the contribution, the different elements of the value proposition, the activities and outcomes, and how they work together in order to actually demonstrate alignment. And you can start having those conversations, which means there's now on one sheet of paper the big picture, so people can start getting alignment on what that perspective actually is. Now, spoken about the causal link and demonstrating, this is where it is. If you've defined the measures properly, then you should be able to say, look, this activity is going to deliver these outcomes, and we can compare and contrast these different measures so that you can build up towards the end outcome. So use the alignment template to start having those conversations, defining those value propositions, see where the links are, bring on those stakeholders who that of obvious different agendas and different paths to follow, and then start bringing them together to focus on one core objective mission. Ask the question, are those agendas aligned to that objective? Do we need to de-scope? Do we need to bring in extra resource? Do we need to refocus our time on one value proposition at the expense of the other? You get the idea. So this is a tool and technique that comes from the value management course. We provide 5 courses. It's relationship value, strategy, portfolio and organizational change. And we're offering a special deal at the moment where you get a 3-for-1 offer, which is basically if you buy relationship, you'll get value and strategy bundled, so that you can obtain a SDBP certificate, which is short for Strategic Digital Business Partner. And that helps people understand where you've been studying and what kind of activities and skills you can bring to the organization to help get alignment, to help develop relationships and trust, and be able to make progress in your career, and also help the company get better competitive advantage, reduce costs through wasted money on projects that don't work, and increase effectiveness. So the link to get more information about this is bta.news/91s. And thank you for taking the time out to listen to this.